The race to find that Titanic tourist submersible this Tuesday night.
Our crews are working around the clock.
The desperate and difficult search and how much air is left for the 5 people on board. Canada's military in mourning. The investigation into a deadly chopper crash near Ottawa. From fire to flooding.
I've never seen this much rain and this much flooding before.
The Alberta communities that can't catch a break. And our Crystal Gumansing inside a Ukrainian military operating room.
We can do one surgery from 8 a.m. to 5 a.m.
The doctors and nurses risking their lives to save lives.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Neetu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. After 2 days of searching, there is still no sign of the Titanic tourist submersible missing in the North Atlantic. We don't know if the vessel is underwater or somewhere on the surface. It's a race against the clock with less than 40 hours of oxygen left for the 5 passengers on board. The expedition left St. John's on Friday, June 16th. It arrived at the surface above the Titanic wreck site on Sunday and started its descent early that morning. About an hour and 45 minutes into the dive, the mothership, the Polar Prince, lost all communication with the vessel. Around 9:15 p.m., the Coast Guard was notified and search efforts began.
This is a very complex search, and the unified team is working around the clock to bring all available assets and expertise to bear as quickly as possible in an effort to solve this very complex problem.
The urgent search is underway in the North Atlantic off the coast of Newfoundland and Labrador. Mike Armstrong is in St. John's. Mike, this is a huge operation involving Canadian and American resources.
This is a massive search effort, basically, out of several places on the East Coast. Aircraft and ships have set out from North Carolina and Rhode Island. But St. John's here in Newfoundland is really the closest to the search area. We're about 640 kilometers out. So it's become sort of a staging area for important equipment that's needed to come and then be sent out. But getting it out there as quickly as possible is vital.
These were the last photos taken of the Titan Sunday before it dove. It was launched from the vessel the Polar Prince. The team on that ship lost contact less than 2 hours into the dive.
I'm nervous. I'm sick to my stomach with nerves.
Jannica Mikkelsen is a friend of one of the men believed to be missing, British billionaire and explorer Hamish Harding. There is hope, but there is also creeping pessimism.
As it stands right now, it would be a miracle if they are recovered alive.
It's just starting to dawn on me about what a tragedy this really is.
Oceanographer David Gallo has worked on searches for missing planes and ships. He's with RMS Titanic, the company that owns the salvage rights to Titanic. But he's also close personal friends with another of the missing. French maritime expert Paul-Henri Narjolet is often called Mr. Titanic.
He's had the most dives to Titanic, studied it the longest, and one of the nicest guys you could ever meet.
This is not a tourist operation.
Now, Stockton Rush was piloting the Titan. He's the CEO of the company that runs the submarine trips, OceanGate Expeditions. Rush was often asked about safety. He would say, if you want to be safe, don't get out of bed. The other 2 men missing are from one of Pakistan's wealthiest families, Shehzada Dawood and his son Suleiman.
Our crews are working around the clock.
Now, the search is being led by the U.S. Coast Guard out of Boston. It includes a Canadian C-130 and a Canadian P-8 aircraft with underwater sonar capability. That's one of the challenges. Searchers have to look both on the surface and below the surface. Now, the timing of when the Titan stopped communicating may be a clue to what happened. One of the dangers of the dive was getting snagged on the Titanic wreck. But an hour and 45 minutes in, the Titan wouldn't yet have been close to the wreck. It would, however, have been under incredible amounts of pressure, making an implosion a possibility.
They probably weren't at the bottom yet, which probably means it wasn't being snagged. And, that leaves an issue with the pressure hull, which would be frightening.
Now, that vessel, the submarine, has a shelf life. The pressurization and depressurization over and over takes a toll on it. There is something called cyclic fatigue that can happen to the hull. And basically, at that depth, any little problem with the hull would be fatal. Neetu?
Now, Mike, you mentioned St. John's is being used as a staging area. What other resources are on their way?
Yeah, there are several ships actually on their way here and also on the way to the site. One ship that arrived at the site already is the Deep Energy. That has some ability to look deep. Another ship that's on the way is a French vessel, the Atalante. That ship has a remote-controlled submarine that can go down unmanned all the way to the ocean floor to look around. That said, that ship is 48 hours away, and time is very much of the essence. Neetu?
It is indeed. Mike Armstrong in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
The New York Times reports experts warned of significant concerns about the vessel several years ago. Crews have already searched an area more than 20,000 square kilometers to try and find the Titan. It's about the size of a large SUV and is designed for deep dives. Eric Sorensen tells us more about the vessel and what it's like inside.
The Titan submersible is a high-tech capsule built to withstand immense pressure, several tons per inch at the depth of the Titanic.
That was co-designed with NASA.
David Pogue of CBS once made the dive with OceanGate founders Stockton Rush, and while the capsule is ultramodern, he was struck by the improvisation of some equipment.
I got these from Camper World. We run the whole thing with this game controller.
So how prepared is the craft or rescuers if the sub snagged in fishing nets or lost all power? The extreme cold, total darkness, and crushing pressure at depths most submarines cannot navigate.
Not even radar works. They can't have a line tethering it all the way down because it would be too heavy and too much drag. So it's really a bit like a moonshot.
The sub is about 7 meters long. The crew entered by the titanium cap with the viewport, and they were bolted in, cannot get out themselves, even if they surface. Inside, it's about the size of a minivan. 5 people with snacks, a little bit of water, but only enough air to breathe. It's estimated for about another day and a half. There are many ways to the surface. The mystery for those who've been down there, if it hasn't already surfaced somewhere, why hasn't it?
It has different kinds of ballast it can let go. It has an inflatable air bladder. It has propellers. So why isn't it at the surface?
Ron Toigo went down on the Titan once and communications were lost for a couple of hours, but he says the crew was fully prepped.
When you go there, you're prepared for all this. Like they don't hide anything. They tell you virtually, all the number of things.
But Toigo is worried.
It's really the families that you got to have, feel for right now.
The Coast Guard says it's sending all available resources, but there's no certainty the sub can be brought up from the depths.
This is a complex case, and the Coast Guard doesn't have all the resources to be able to effect this kind of rescue.
The French are sending a deep submersible for what would be a miracle rescue beneath the surface.
You're not going to be able to transfer them onto another vessel at depth. You're going to have to bring the whole submersible up to attach something to them to help bring it up, and then extract them. That's all going to take a lot of time.
And what rescuers do not have is a lot of time. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Later on Global National, we'll hear more from Tim Maltin, the Titanic expert, on the possible conditions aboard the submersible and some of the biggest challenges ahead for this immense rescue operation. 2 members of the Royal Canadian Air Force are feared dead and 2 others are injured after a Chinook helicopter crashed in Ontario. The aircraft went down in the Ottawa River near Garrison Petawawa just after midnight. Our Mercedes Stephenson is at the base following the developments. Mercedes?
Neetu, we have been watching the parade of very somber and sad faces leaving this base as colleagues worry about those 2 missing individuals who have still not been identified by the military. We have seen vehicles entering the base from the Ontario Provincial Police that are titled Underwater Search and Recovery Unit. On his way into question period today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau surprised reporters by stating that some members of the Canadian Armed Forces had died in the crash.
I was happy to speak with the Chief of Defence Staff last night to express my condolences on for the families and colleagues of the members who've been killed.
Neither the military certainly wasn't expecting the Prime Minister to break that news, and they still have not confirmed that those 2 members are dead, although they've updated their language to call this a search and recovery operation instead of search and rescue. Military sources tell me that's partially because the military has a policy of not declaring people deceased until the missing have actually been recovered.
Okay. And Mercedes, how are these helicopters used, and what was the aircrew training for?
So I'm told that this is a fairly typical night training exercise. They were going up the Ottawa River. That is a common insertion point for troops to practice, to deliver, for example, key equipment, or to deliver up to 30 crew that can be on board this, soldiers that will be inserted somewhere. And the nighttime part is because Western militaries actually have an advantage at night because they have night vision goggles. We still don't know the details of what actually happened in this crash, but there will be a full investigation into it. It is the workhorse of the military fleet. I spoke with Jason Arthur, who's a former pilot on a Chinook, and this is what he told us about the situation in the community today.
The military is a very close-knit group and family, and an event like this definitely will shake everyone to the core, and I know they'll do everything they can to investigate this and make sure that they are able to prevent it from happening again.
Neetu, at this hour, the Chinook fleet has not been grounded, but what caused this behemoth to go into the river will certainly be something the military is looking into, and we are waiting for updates on what has happened to those 2 missing members of its crew.
All right, Mercedes Stephenson in Petawawa, Ontario. Thanks for this, Mercedes. Albertans going from one extreme to another. Coming up, the torrential rain ravaging communities recently threatened by wildfires. Weather conditions in parts of Alberta have gone from one extreme to another. Residents who've just returned from wildfire evacuations west of Edmonton are now faced with floods. Global's Morgan Black is in Peers, Alberta tonight. Morgan?
Neetu, the backyard of this home in Peers, Alberta is almost completely submerged. The homeowner says he watched as it rained and rained and his property line disappeared. It's like this throughout the hamlet west of Edmonton. People in the south area of Peers were ordered to shelter in place Tuesday morning because of heavy rain, rising water, and a bridge that can't be crossed because the water is compromising the bank. Emergency responders are helping to get people out of the area as it experiences water levels most residents have never seen. On Monday evening, an evacuation order was issued for residents in the nearby Lower Robb area. Edson got a lot of rain too. Mayor Kevin Zahara says the town is working through a number of challenges.
There is the risk of contamination with water. People's basements have sewage in them. Some of our creeks may have sewage in them. So we're asking people to stay out of those areas, making sure that they're taking the appropriate safety precautions.
I've never seen it this flooded, and I've been here 19 years. This is the first time I've seen it this high. It was Mother Nature getting back at us.
It's even harder, people say, knowing this is the rain they desperately needed when the county was dealing with wildfire. Neetu?
All right, Morgan Black in Peers, Alberta. Thanks, Morgan. Lives on the line ahead. Medical experts work around the clock at a Ukrainian hospital. Sirens wailed across Ukraine's capital early this morning as Russia launched a widespread air assault. The 3-hour bombardment targeted several cities from the front lines in the east to as far west as Lviv. Ukraine says it shot down nearly all 35 attack drones. No deaths were reported. We don't fully know how many Ukrainian soldiers have died since Russia's full-scale invasion began more than a year ago, or how many people have been wounded. Global News was recently granted access to a military hospital in the Kyiv region. Crystal Gamansing and video journalist Braden Latham observed several surgeries and spoke with the teams tasked with saving lives. And a warning, some of the video is graphic.
Ukrainian medical professionals are becoming some of the most skilled and knowledgeable in combat medicine. The expertise, however, comes at a price.
When we work on a wound in an operation room, we just concentrate it and do what we must do. After work, I'm thinking about different stuff. then we have sad emotions, but now we must do and keep calm.
Dr. Ihor Lashkin is good at keeping calm. Global News was granted access to a military hospital in the Kyiv region and observed the traumatologist working to repair a fractured tibia.
It's not a big injury, actually.
Shrapnel wounds, limbs torn apart by mines, organs damaged by bullets. Staff here have seen it all. The staff in this facility say they are working around the clock. If they have a couple of minutes, they sit down, get some food, and then they're back at it. 3 operations were simultaneously underway when we were on site. Nurses and medical staff ping-ponged from supply rooms into the operating areas. Directions shouted, and different songs could be heard coming from small speakers. A well-choreographed dance in a small space.
It's very great, honest, to use my knowledge of help our guys.
Most of the patients here are Ukrainian soldiers with catastrophic injuries, but there are also doctors injured while working near the front lines. We were told the man who was rushed past our camera on the stretcher is a doctor who lost both legs. We're not revealing the location of this facility or showing any identifying markers. Too often, they've become targets. The World Health Organization verified more than 1,000 attacks on healthcare facilities since Russia's full invasion began. Some days, Dr. Lashkin performs 10 operations. Other days, he tackles just one complex case.
We can do one surgery from 8 a.m. to 5 a.m. all day, all night, yeah.
So you just keep going?
Uh-huh.
Away from the busy OR, we meet Stepan Barabash. He's here getting follow-up care for his back and arm after spending weeks in a different hospital in the southeast. The 47-year-old was injured during a mortar attack in Bakhmut, the location of one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the war. It's especially scary at night during shelling, he says. They use incendiary shells. Everything glows, and there's a feeling that you are in hell. Everything, everywhere, burns. For most who end up here, the priority is returning to the battlefield, not rest and recovery. The medical teams stitching them back together are working for the benefit of their patient, but also their country. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, Kyiv region, Ukraine.
Next, Titanic expert Tim Maltin on the challenges of finding the missing tourist submersible. Returning now to our top story, the search for the missing Titanic tourist submersible in the North Atlantic and the race against time to find the 5 people on board. For further insight, I'm joined by Titanic expert and author Tim Maltin from London. Tim, thank you so much for doing this. I want to start with your reaction to all of this. What's running through your mind now into the 3rd day since the submersible made contact?
Well, we're all hoping and praying that a miracle will happen and that, in fact, these poor people will be found safe and well before they run out of oxygen. However, it does seem that unless the submersible has made it to the surface, where it could just about in daylight hours be spotted fortuitously by a helicopter, search helicopter passing overhead, if that happens, then there's a chance. But if they're down on the seabed, possibly snagged in a fishing net or something that's got caught in the wreckage, then I really don't know that there are any other submarines that can go down that deep that have the capability to recover the submarine with the stricken people on board.
Right, and you haven't been to the Titanic yourself, but as an expert on the wreckage, can you give us an idea of what kind of conditions people would face at those depths?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is that it's 400 times the pressure of the atmosphere, which is absolutely astronomically high. It takes 2.5 hours to descend slowly down to the seabed. When you land, it's kind of soft mud. It's also pitch black. and it's freezing cold down there. So you're relying on your batteries for light and also to light the wreckage that you're looking at, or even the seabed. And you're relying on the electricity to keep you slightly warm as well.
What are some of the biggest challenges around trying to mount a rescue operation?
Well, the first thing is that the Titanic sank, even by the standards of 1912, when she sank 111 years ago, she sank in the middle of nowhere. So she's a long, long way from land. She's in a very deep part of the ocean that's 2.5 miles down. And obviously, there's a lot of bad weather and things around there that they've had recently. So it's not just like finding a needle in a haystack. You've also got to think that radar doesn't work at depth, so you've only got sonar. So really, it's a very, very difficult rescue.
Our understanding is that it takes about 2.5 hours for this OceanGate submersible to get down to the Titanic, but communication loss was reported about an hour and a half into the journey. What do you make of that?
Yes, that is slightly odd, but I was speaking to a gentleman earlier today who actually had been on the previous OceanGate expedition, and worryingly, he said that it was not infrequent for communication to be lost from time to time between the submersible and what I'm calling the mothership, as it were. So it does seem that this technology was a little bit shaky.
I want to ask you about this. The New York Times is reporting that back in 2018, a letter was written to OceanGate warning of possible, quote, catastrophic problems with the submersible's development and its planned mission to the Titanic wreckage. How safe do you think this exploration is?
Well, I think the answer to that is it's not as safe as we all thought and hoped it would be. I mean, we've all done things like, I don't know, bungee jumping or whatever it is, when one has to sign one's life away. So one's kind of used to signing these waivers. But in fact, I'm sure that when the father and the 19-year-old boy who is, or young man, I should say, who was on the submersible, I'm sure when they signed their waivers, I'm sure they thought that they were coming back.
Right, that is Titanic expert and author Tim Maltin. Tim, thank you very much for your insight.
My pleasure.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. This is St. John's Harbour in Newfoundland and Labrador, the staging area for the search of the missing Titan submersible and its 5 crew members. Thanks so much for watching. Donna will be back at the anchor desk tomorrow. Have a great night.